Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Now, last week, my Ask an Atheist show was a disaster because my guest didn't turn up. I'm happy to say that he's corrected his calendar malfunction and I've booked him again for later this month. And tonight's guest has turned up. So I'd like you all to welcome Jonathan Pearce.
Hello,
How the devil are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. Very good and happy to be here and discussing, because it's Saturday night UK time. So what better thing can you do on a Saturday night in lockdown than have a little tipple and do some philosophizing?
Absolutely. Well, this actually is alcohol-free beer. I'm trying to keep a clear head.
Good on you. Yeah. I should probably do the same, but nothing like muddling through.
Yes, indeed. Well, as you say, there's nothing much better to do on a Saturday night when you're locked down. Anyway,
well, do you know what I think? So I've talked before about with friends about what would heaven look like if you could invent heaven, and I often we have this group called the Tippling Philosophers. From my blog name comes from that. So we're a group that used to meet sort of monthly or ever so often in a pub. And we'd pick a subject and we'd do a sort of roundtable discussion, sort of somewhat formal, somewhat informal. And we talked about, well, what would heaven look like? And I say, I think it would look like this. I think it would actually look like a bunch of us mates just talking philosophy forever. You can never get bored. Maybe not. Hello, I seem to have lost the host. Oh well.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, I'm here.
That was very weird. 2 weeks ago, my internet completely broke. The telecom cabinet across the road blew a fuse, and I was offline for several days. It came on a little while, went off again, came on a little while, and each time they had to fetch somebody from Basingstoke to come and fix it. Ridiculous. So,
well, we're here now, and I was just explaining my idea of heaven, and then I think God probably just got stuck in his head. Well, if that's your idea, I'm just going to ruin it for everyone, and then just broke the internet.
Yeah, probably. Well, at the moment, I'm using my phone as a hotspot, so I don't know how long that's going to last. But the odd thing is, according to my phone, I have a great connection, but my computer can't see it.
That's all right. We're live, so we might as well go for it.
No, wait a minute. No, it's the cabinet again. I've got, now my phone has caught up, it's giving me 4 megabytes download and 12 upload, which is rubbish because I normally get 80 download and 30 upload, because we're right across the road from, there's fiber right up to across the road. Anyway, we'll see how long my phone lasts before it runs out of megabytes. What a thing to happen, eh? I'm sorry about this, Jonathan, but it's, as you say, it's beyond our control, probably God.
Well, you see, when God has complete sovereignty over everything in the universe, right? So if you are a Christian, everything, or any other kind of sort of theist that adheres to classical theism, literally everything that happens is either by God's direct will or by God's omissive will, which an omissive will is where God doesn't step in. So, for example, you look at something like a tsunami that kills 230,000 people. You say, well, if God didn't make that happen, then God has at least let it happen and could have stopped it, and that's functionally equivalent to making that happen, right? So, even the internet going down is within his purview, and he's allowed that. He's made that happen.
He's almighty, isn't he? So everything's within his purview, as you say. But that's Epicurean thinking, isn't it? Whether he's...
So that's the whole sort of the problem of evil. Is he able to? You go back to the tsunami. Is he loving enough to care enough to do something about it? Is he knowledgeable enough to know what to do about it? And is he powerful enough to be able to do something about it? And given all those things, then why does that happen? So this is where all instances of pain and suffering are therefore not gratuitous, because if God has all those abilities and would want to do something about it but still allows them, they must be necessary for some reason. So then this says that since all pain and suffering is not gratuitous, or the Christian would say this, then all pain and suffering is therefore necessary in some way. So what purpose does it serve? And this is where theodicies come in. So Christian thinkers or any other kind of religious thinkers of the same ilk will say, right, I'll present a theodicy. So in other words, this pain and suffering is a corollary of free will, or is for building souls, or whatever. But the problem for theodicies are that, as far as I'm concerned, they are consequentialist moral sort of calculations, which is to say that this bit of evil that happens here, it's not gratuitous, it's necessary for this greater good that comes later. And then people like William Lane Craig come along and say, well, actually, God, consequentialism is a terrible ethic because you don't need God for consequentialism. The morality of any given action is derived from the consequences to that action, so you don't really need God to do that calculation. So therefore, consequentialism is a terrible ethic, and yet every Christian philosopher appears to use consequentialism when they're creating theodicies to answer the problem of evil. And you have this real tension between these ideas, and people like William Lane Craig again will then say, well, I'm going to think a way around this and say that God isn't a moral agent, he doesn't have duties to himself, blah blah blah, and it's all kind of really problematic in my opinion. But then that would take sort of unpicking. But the basic principle is that God is actually a consequentialist.
Well, William Lane Craig in particular is very good at thinking his way around things.
Yes, well, and that's the job of theology, isn't it? It's almost a puzzle. It's where and when you have to hold on to this, this is where motivated reasoning is so important to understand, because when you look at Christian thinkers, you know that they are motivated to think this way because actually, in the case of William Lane Craig, he's got a whole business empire set up around it. He's invested his entire life into it, and so therefore he can't. There is absolutely no way he can deny that God exists or that Jesus, was resurrected. All these things he absolutely has to adhere to. So there's absolutely no way he can change his mind. He just can't change his mind. He's got too much on the line. And that motivated reasoning then explains why people are willing to have all these bolt-ons and add-ons and gerrymandering and contortions and ways of coming to believe or coming to rationalize something that they believe in. Rather than building upwards from a really solid foundation, they are starting with the Bible and the truth of the Bible and then building back. Yes.
Well, one of the apologists that I debated a couple of times, Jonathan McClatchy, I don't know whether you've heard of him. He picked up on something that he saw on the Atheist Experience today. He said, because they mentioned that there might be some mythology around Jesus and the question whether or not he may have existed. And so this amused Jonathan, who expressed his amazement that the viewers of Atheist Experience could have got it so wrong as to cast doubt on Jesus's existence.
And yet, by the same token, he would no doubt believe that every other religious claim in the existence of humanity is mythological. And so that's just straight away. I mean, before you look at any evidence, etc., there are double standards on the show there. That's without doubt. And you find this so often in claims of Christian exceptionalism. It's like, well, my religion, blah blah blah, and the way I believe it is got to be true because X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, let's look at applying that logic to these other religious claims, and you find that actually you're operating in double standards there, and that's hugely problematic.
So where are you on the mythicism scale? Are you a hard mythicist or a soft mythicist, or do you accept that the likelihood is that there was a carpenter called Jesus?
I am largely ambivalent, and by that I mean it doesn't really make any difference. I think on balance I'm a historicist, so I think the best explanation for the beginnings of a movement is that somebody existed, and I think all that we can know from the Gospels is that somebody was Jesus of Nazareth, who was an itinerant preacher, I think, and died in Jerusalem. Was executed in Jerusalem, and I think that's all you can know. And so therefore everything else that you read in the Gospels is legendary embellishment, and therefore it is mythological overlay, and you cannot know anything really useful about Jesus from reading the Gospels to such an extent that the Gospels might as well be myth. So all the claims in the Gospels are essentially mythological, and you can talk about the people follow it. I can imagine people followed an itinerant preacher, Preacher did what they thought were pretty amazing stuff. He was just like any other itinerant preacher, Simon Bar Kokhba or modern, David Koresh or whatever. These cult leaders that are very charismatic and generate a following who absolutely believe this guy is the guy. They had messianic beliefs about Jesus, and then Jesus went and died. And they were expecting maybe a militaristic style or some kind of political leader that would go on and fulfill the messianic, duties, if you like, that they would have in their belief system around Judaism. And this didn't happen. And so they had to, and we know from cognitive dissonance, theories and research that actually most of the time these people won't suddenly just go, right, I don't believe anymore, that's obviously rubbish. They'll double down and they'll find reasons as to how that can still prevail as a belief. So how can this guy still be the Messiah if he's been executed? So they go back into the Old Testament, into the Hebrew Bible, and they say, what is the evidence for a Messiah dying? So then they find Passover lamb. So John would say he's a Paschal lamb, and the death was basically the Passover. This is the new Passover, and the dying, and the kind of sacrificial lamb aspect, and you look at all the so-called prophecies from the Hebrew Bible that predict Jesus's existence, and they are all misapplied prophecies, but they all just look like they've been cherry-picked to serve a purpose, to justify a continued belief that Jesus was actually the Messiah, even though he's been executed. Oh dear.
Yeah, well, and of course the Bible was edited and interpreted, I suppose would be a good word. I was going to say translated, but of course it had previously been translated anyway, in the 4th century, long after Jesus and his followers had died. And that was a wonderful opportunity, surely, to make predictions or prophecies come true.
Well, the whole process of constructing the Bible, there's so many problems. First of all, you got Paul, who was the earliest written source of Jesus, not having. So Paul uses loads of Hebrew Bible quotations, Old Testament quotations, uses virtually no Jesus quotations. So why is that? Why, if you're trying to preach to sending out epistles and being persuasive to your flock, if you like, why would you not use the person you're talking about? Well, it's because those things didn't really exist then. Those sayings weren't really around. They were later developed. So Paul is using the Hebrew Bible to defend this idea about Jesus, but he's largely silent on Jesus. You have very few facts. And throughout those epistles, you would expect something. And that's where absence of evidence is evidence of absence, when you would expect evidence. So, for example, if I said to you, there was an earthquake yesterday in Portsmouth, and we look at the evidence and there's no reports in the newspapers, no one's mentioned anything, there's no eyewitnesses, blah, 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 blah. The fact that there is no evidence of my claim is actually evidence against my claim being true. So Christians will say that this maxim doesn't work. No, it does work. When you expect evidence and there isn't evidence, that is a problem, right? And so I'd say Paul's silence is a big problem. I'd say the Gospels are increasingly embellished. And you have this arbitrary line where they say, do you know what? We're going to have 4 Gospels, 4 winds or whatever, north, south, east, west, blah, 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 whatever. 4 is a good number. But also, it seems like these Gospels, these non-canonical Gospels, are a bit bonkers. So we're going to draw a line down there to say they're ridiculous and these ones are great. Well, hang on. These have got like saints parading around Jerusalem, dead saints parading around Jerusalem. They've got a resurrected divine being. They've got all sorts of. Where can you draw the line between that being bonkers and that not? Yes. It's just a bizarre, arbitrary line. So I think the whole construction of the Christian Bible, the New Testament, is particularly problematic. And then when you see a theological development going on, because arguably even like the early gospel writers don't believe Jesus was God, right? So there's an argument to say that actually they believe he is a Messiah, and it's only when you get to John where you get this high Christology, and this is called the synoptic problem. So you've got the 3 synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all generally agree, all have the same stories, and then in Monty Python's parlance, John is right out. John is right out. Okay, so what explains this? And it just seems like this development of theology that goes on and then continues through John into, as you say, the construction of the Bible as a whole, and on and on and on for thousands of years, until now you get these ideas of what the atonement was, but no one really even agreeing on the atonement. That's why Jesus existed, right? That's why Jesus existed and died to pay for our sins, right? And if you can't agree on how that works, which Christians can't, right? They can't agree on the theory of atonement, then what? So I've written this book on the resurrection, John. I spoke to you previously about the resurrection. I talked to you, and at the beginning of the book, I talk about, well, if you can't really establish how the Holy Trinity works, so that Jesus is God, right? Yes. If you can't really make sense of that, and your best theory is something called Mysterianism, which is, we don't know how it works, but I'm telling you it works on faith, right? So don't know how it works, but it works. So that's a Holy Trinity. And then you have the atonement. So why did Jesus die, and how does that work? Paying for our sins. How does that work? And then either you have a kind of Mysterianism, well, it works, but we don't quite know how, or you just have these competing theories. And then you're going to say, and the resurrection happened. Well, none of it makes sense, because it doesn't philosophically and theologically make sense, let alone the history. The whole of Christianity is built on the Holy Trinity and the atonement, and neither of those things are sensible.
No. Well, we can't be responsible for the sins of another, can we? We are each responsible for our own actions. So,
well, but of course, you're right.
Rather than atonement, it's more like a sacrifice.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're right, but then, of course, in the Bible, you can be punished for the actions of your descendants, as according to, I forget where in the Old Testament. But the problem with the Bible, of course, is that it can justify pretty much any opinion you have about anything, right? So if you love gays, there's a Christianity for you, or from the Bible. If you hate gays, if you love money, if you hate money, if you love slavery, if you hate slavery, you've got 42,000 different denominations of Christianity for a reason. And the reason is because you can take anything out of the Bible that you want. Liberation theology and it's all, all these different competing theologies that can supposedly be based in the Bible. It's prosperity gospel, make loads of money. Jesus would be well up for that. I'm not sure about that. Temple, turning over those tables, he's pretty angry. Arguably, Jesus was a socialist, so deal with that.
That socialist fits in much better than rip-off merchant. Anyway, it's odd, isn't it, that the Christian God who created everything needs money. He can't create himself a couple of dollars. What's going on?
In what sense? What do you mean?
Well, every one of these 42,000 denominations wants money from their congregation. Allegedly for their God. I mean, I'm not sure what he's going to do with it, but in any case, if he can create the universe, surely it's just a matter of clicking his fingers and there's a pile of gold.
Well, that whole clicking your fingers thing from God, I mean, it's a bit of an issue for all sorts of things. Take, for example, and again, this goes to atonement. So some of the early atonement theories, or ransom theories, they're called, are to do with like humanity being in bondage to Satan. Right? So if the idea of Satan falls apart, then those ideas of atonement fall apart. Now, Satan is, I always say, I've written on this before, that Satan is God's middle management executive. Okay, so if God is all powerful, he can do that and Satan would disappear. That is within God's. If you are saying God is truly all powerful, battle between the idea you get, the kind of yin and yang battle between good and evil, assumes a kind of 50-50. But if you're truly omnipotent, it's like job done. So Satan, if Satan exists as this rebelling against God, it doesn't make sense, because why would someone rebel against an entity that they know is omnipotent and omni blah blah blah? Why would you walk away from that kind of love and amazingness of heaven and then reject that And B, if you knew that you could be squashed, why would you do it anyway? But the point is that Satan could be squashed like that.
Yes.
But he's not. So if he's not, God is allowed. It's back to this omissive will. It's either a direct will of God or it's a omissive will. So Satan is providing God some kind of service such that God doesn't want to annihilate Satan.
Yes.
If you believe Satan exists. He's being used by God to do so. So when you say, these fossils, when you get to speak to young Earth creationists and say these fossils are placed by Satan, you're like, yeah, but God can unplace them and God can destroy Satan. So if those fossils are being placed by Satan, they are actually ultimately being placed by God. And there is no way out of that. If you believe in a literal Satan, you cannot get out of that quandary unless you're saying God is not omnipotent.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, makes sense to me. Now, I don't know much about, you mentioned the Gnostic Gospels that didn't get included and how they have tall tales as well as the synoptic ones that did get included when the Bible was edited under Emperor Constantine's directive. I don't know much about the Gnostic Gospels, but it seems to me that Gnostic or synoptic, what's going on here is a love of narrative rather than evidence. People are falling for a story regarding that to be very important and regarding evidence to be of trivial value.
I think what you've hit on there is, I don't know that I call it story, I call it theology. So the Gnostics had a very different idea about what was kind of evil and the body, the human based kind of body versus like the spirit. And there's arguments to say that the Gnostics kind of believed in a spiritual resurrection of God, of Jesus. And here's an argument. So Richard Carey's done a lot of work on arguing that actually this bodily resurrection that required an empty tomb was a later embellishment, and actually there's evidence that Paul believed that in a spiritual resurrection, so on and so forth. And whatever, I mean, we don't need to get into that and what the Gnostics actually believe, but the importance here, I think, is that it's theology. So some Christians will say that they will look at the biblical claims and they'll say this is history theologized. Right. So it's like you have the history and you get this theological overlay. I think it's the other way around. I think it's theology historicized, which is to say that they start with the theology and then they build a narrative, a historical narrative around that theology. And I think that explains John's difference. So his stories that he has Jesus doing are very different. So where I said earlier, Matthew, Mark, Luke have very similar content, they do, and the different stories and pericopes and whatever of Jesus doing X, Y, and Z. John's is quite different, and the reason his is different is because he's starting with this theological understanding of what Jesus was, who Jesus was, and then creating a gospel to fit that theology. So I think that creates these stories.
Yeah. Whether you call it narrative or theology, we all like a ripping yarn, don't we? I mean, our lives have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's fascinating to us. People like to know how we got to where we are. I mean, for example, a small audience of it's the cream that's floated to the top of the milk will want to know about you and how you became the person you are. Were you raised in a religion, Jonathan?
Well, no, actually. So I am not very many American atheists come to of my sort of age and older will have come to their atheism by a sort of journey out of religion. Right. And so I think, and you would understand this, that British atheism is very different to American, and British religion is very different to American religion. So, or Christianity. So we have a very nominal kind of Christian, the Church of England, where you are brought up in this nominally C of E kind of background, but you're not really a proper believer. But I went to Sunday school and then kicked up a fuss, didn't like it, came out of that. My parents lived around the world. My dad was in the Navy, so I went to a private school, went to a boarding school, which was religiously based, but and I was Christian. I got confirmed. So up until probably 17, 18, I was Christian. But what's interesting is when I look back at my Christianity, where I used to pray to God at night, basically asking for stuff or chatting or whatever that kind of ridiculous young person's prayer is. I really didn't understand the theology at all. I didn't understand the Holy Trinity. Like, people don't understand now that God the Father and Jesus, the Son of God. Son of God doesn't literally mean the biological son of God the Father. And so people don't understand the Trinity. Now, I didn't understand the Trinity. And when I look back now, having read the Bible and know all the stuff about theology and philosophy, I look back and go, my Christianity was utter bollocks. And I didn't understand anything. And then you start wondering, well, could I really call myself a Christian? And then you get this whole debate about what true Christianity is and who gets to define what Christianity is and who's a Christian. Because really, for all intents and purposes, I had a completely ridiculous understanding of what Christianity was. I then sort of left school and went backpacking and went around, and my belief was sort of from 17 onwards, I guess, was getting less and less. And then you go around and you see stuff around the world and suffering and poverty, and you're like, and basically the problem of evil comes out and you see it firsthand, and you're like, yeah, no, none of this really makes any sense. And then it was sort of very easy slip out that, because I was never in it in that American fundamental manner. I was in it in a C of E. I wear a crucifix some of the time, and I pray to God when I want stuff and when I'm lonely. But otherwise, basically, I don't think about it at all during the day, really.
Yeah. Well, I had an even more secular upbringing than you, because neither of my parents were religious. We weren't taken to church except for a wedding. And I didn't meet religion until I started school, when, of course, it's still compulsory to hold a communal assembly of the whole school based on some faith or belief, although the secular society are attacking that at the moment, trying to
it's called collective worship, and it still has to be Christian based by law, even though in many schools it isn't. But yeah, you're right.
Most schools ignore it now because there's simply not a big enough hall for the entire school to get into. I remember we had to stand because there wasn't room to have seats. So that was when I first met religion. And like you, I was sent to Sunday school, and because I could sing, I could keep a tune. So I got dragooned into the choir, and they dressed me up in a ruff and a surplice. And I stuck that for about 2 Sundays, and then I never went again. So meanwhile, I was falling in love with science. I went to the grammar school, and from 11 onwards, I met science, and that was it for me. So goodbye religion, really.
But I think the important thing in those early days or the important thing about developing as a human is how your parents treat you. So do they feed you the conclusion, or do they feed you the tools to tackle the world? So I'm very much and I've said this before in other interviews that I've got twin boys, they're now 10 years old. One of them, I remember some years ago saying to me, so it's quite young, saying, do you believe in God? And I was like, I didn't really want to talk about it because I didn't want to prime them or prejudice them to believe a conclusion that early. But force them like, well, I don't. And Oscar said, well, I want to believe what you believe, so I don't believe in God either. And I said, no. Like, in my head, I'm like, even though I'm an atheist, no, I can't have that. I can't have you saying that explicitly as well. It's fascinating from a kind of evolutionary psychological point of view. But I can't have you saying, I want to believe this because you believe it and you're my dad. And that was just raised loads of alarm bells. And I was thinking, well, if I was a fundamentalist Christian, I'd be like, yes, brilliant. You believe what I believe in Jesus and blah, blah, blah. But me as a skeptic, but still, I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want you to come to your own conclusion. And at the moment, you're too young. So what am I going to do? I'm going to give you the tools. That means you can best evaluate all the data that you get in, and hopefully you'll come to a rational conclusion.
Absolutely. Same with me. we're not into brainwashing.
No.
As a science teacher, I'm a retired science teacher.
Hmm.
What I want to do is help people to find out for themselves.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've got lots of questions coming in. Let me see if I can put some up here for us to address.
Yeah.
What's the evidence there's no God?
That's an interesting question, because actually that's asking to prove a negative. So I could, that is a really interesting question, because I'd say to the questioner, what's the evidence there are no unicorns? Like, what's the positive evidence that there are no unicorns? And of course, the positive evidence is I've never seen unicorns. Yeah, but I've never seen an alligator. You know, but they exist. Okay, I've seen them on TV. Okay, but have I seen God? You know, so that it's a very difficult question to ask. What's the evidence? I can bring to the table rational evidence, by which I mean arguments against the existence of God. The problem of evil, I think, is particularly thorny, and it means that all suffering has to be necessary. And that I could bring loads of arguments against this classical idea of God, that is all powerful, all loving, and all knowing. The fact that this must be a perfect creation, because God is perfect and wouldn't create imperfectly, and so therefore this is a perfect world in some way. Either we're on a journey to a perfect place, or it's perfect now in some way. Like, how does that explain all that horrible evil, suffering, carnivorousness? Why is there an entire animal sort of system of sustenance and energy that's based on the death and pain and death of countless billions of other animals? You know, carnivorousness. If I designed a world, I wouldn't design carnivorousness, right? I design all animals to be to operate on photosynthesis, for example. So I can. There are loads and loads of philosophical arguments I will throw, and then it's a case of looking at all the evidence for each of these religions. And because of the Christocentrism of Britain and America, I deal a lot with Christianity, and I look at the Bible and unpick the resurrection and nativity, blah, 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 and show that that's all nonsense, as are all the other religions. You as a Christian believe all the other religions are nonsense. Are you applying double standards? It looks like you are. Here's how you're applying double standards, blah, 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 blah. Therefore, your claims are incorrect. Can I categorically say there's no God? No, I can't. The only thing I can indubitably say is that I exist. Other than that, everything else is a probability. Then it's just, right, okay, it's a non-zero chance of God existing, but it's pretty damned small for all the reasons and many more that I've given. But evidence for a negative is difficult.
Yeah. So more cowbell. Jonathan isn't actually claiming there's no God. He's saying it's unlikely that there's a God.
Highly improbable. Yeah.
And I answer that in a similar but different way, because I say that it's not possible to disprove the claim that there is a God, simply because the universe is too big to search and eliminate the possibility that there might be a creator deity lurking somewhere in it. And worse than that, the supporters of the God concept claim that he's actually outside the cosmos, wherever that is. So it's not possible to disprove their claim.
Yeah.
That's why
I mean, there are also interesting philosophical arguments about, well, if you are outside of time, so before creation, causally before creation, because you can't say before because it's temporal and time didn't exist. So causally prior, if that even makes sense, because I would argue that causation requires time. Time is measures change and blah blah blah. So I'd say that even creating the actual activity of creating in a non-temporal scenario is impossible. I can't make sense of it. So to assert that God existed causally prior to creation and then created is actually, to me, an incoherent idea.
Not only that, it's not only causality not only requires time, but it requires space. You have to be somewhere to do your making.
Yeah. You can argue that these causation is an article of sort of natural laws and physics and whatnot. Yeah.
which applies perfectly well in the universe.
Yeah.
But there's no reason to think that it might apply outside of it if there is such a place.
And when you talk about a God existing that we'd have evidence for, then that talks about some kind of interaction. So God interacting in the world. And then when you start looking at all these claims, and then you find they fall down, all these other God, the Christian will admit that all the other ones are pretty much false, and so. And the atheist will say, and the Christian ones, and here's the evidence, why, blah, blah, blah. So over time, we have, imagine it's just a big horse race. So over time, supernaturalist explanations for anything have been supplanted by naturalist explanations. So if and that has happened countless times, that thunder and lightning used to be Thor's hammer and whatever. So if over the last 2,000 years we've discounted supernaturalism and replaced it with naturalism in each of these instances, but we've never gone the other way. So we've never gone, this is explained by naturalism, now it's been supplanted by supernaturalist explanation. Why would you bet against a horse that has won literally 10,000 races and never lost a race to like explain the next thing? Maybe it's consciousness, or maybe it's the beginning of the universe, or whatever. I think on probability, the likelihood is, without looking at the evidence, the probability is going to be that naturalism explains it, because it's explained everything else.
Yes, absolutely. There's no argument with that. Now, this person called One Way says, so you chose the label atheist, which is the denial of God, but you aren't an atheist, you're just unconvinced. How are you going to answer that?
No, I'm an agnostic atheist. And so if I'm being pernickety and someone says, well, what's your belief system? Well, not even belief system. What's your, label concerning God? I would say I'm an agnostic atheist, in the sense that I'm agnostic about everything other than I exist, in a Cartesian sense, which is to say that what can we know 100%, indubitably, without any doubt at all? And there's only one thing: cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. Something that is me as a thinking entity exists. In order to doubt that I exist, I have to exist, whatever I is, and we won't get into that now. But that's the only thing I know 100%. Everything else is a probability, including the God argument. So that's why I say I'm an agnostic atheist. But if my daily life is entirely atheistic, so I go through the day not assuming God exists, because I don't believe God exists. My belief, in the same way that I don't know 100% that the sun will rise tomorrow, that we'll continue our orbit around the sun. But I'm fairly convinced, I believe we will. I really do believe that we will continue our orbit. But I can't, this is kind of related to Hume and induction and all sorts of things. I can't know 100%, but the probability is well in my favor that the sun will rise tomorrow. And it's the same with God. I'm really, really convinced that God doesn't exist. And I act as if I'm a 100% atheist, but I'm a 99.999999999% atheist.
Yes. Well, there is no certainty. People need to get used to that. So I don't think that atheist actually means denial of God. I mean, if you take it back to its etymology, it means without belief rather than...
Oh, I might have to disagree with you here, John.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, so there's a difference. So the label of atheism is interesting. And you're not wrong, but you're not right, because it just depends how you use a label. So there's something called weak atheism or negative atheism, which is this belief that atheism is a lack of belief. Okay, so it's just that I lack a belief in God. And that can kind of explain a baby being born an atheist. I would say a baby isn't born an atheist. A baby is born agnostic. It just doesn't know enough. It can't commit to either proposition. So I believe in strong or positive atheism, which is a belief in a proposition that God does not exist, or God exists. So I say, here's the proposition, and it's a positive statement that God doesn't exist. And the reason I believe this is a better explanation or better definition of the word is that I spend a lot of my day banging on online, arguing to toss and writing books and articles that God doesn't exist. it's not really a lack of belief. Do you see my meaning? Like, and I think atheists don't like saying that atheism is a belief, so they retreat to this. It's a lack of belief, and I think that's to get away from seeing atheism as a religion. I'm like, oh, that's a load of rubbish. Basically, it's just an adherence to a proposition. It's a belief in a proposition that God does not exist.
Okay, well, as you say, we're going to disagree a little bit there. I'm wary of the way other people attach meaning to the word atheist. I don't like what they consider an atheist to be, which is, purposeless, immoral, God-hating. I don't want to associate myself with that. I know it's their perception, but that's a label that I do not want put on me.
And that the problem is that the label tells you nothing. It tells you about whether you believe in God or not, but that's it. So atheism, when you have often, religious people decrying, exactly as you say, atheists for being X, Y, and Z, it's like, no, actually his atheism or her atheism doesn't say that. Atheism just says, I don't believe in God, and the rest you have to do an awful lot of philosophy. So, okay, given that, how do we start thinking about morality? How do we start thinking about truth, epistemology? How do we start thinking about ontology? I've got to do an awful lot of other philosophy to establish my worldview. Atheism does nothing for me. It tells me nothing, really.
There is no worldview. There is no belief system based on atheism, because if it's not a belief, you can't build a belief system on not believing. That wouldn't make sense.
I think humanism is a much better label to do the job of explaining to someone positively what you are. And I think probably humanism needs to be put out there as a label far more often by the media, by people. I think there's a really big job for like the American Humanist Association and Humanist UK to really make the worldview visible, to say we don't believe in God, but this is what we do believe in.
Yes. They like to have some sort of ideology for us. Come on, I'll decide my own. Thank you very much. Leave it to me.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know whether you've come into contact with what's his name, Alessandro De Grasso. He is an anti-evolutionist. He doesn't believe in it. And he wants to divert the message of our show to his topic. So I'm not going to let him put up all his questions. I've got a whole string of questions from Evolution False. And maybe we could do that on another day. But this is Ask an Atheist. This isn't Bash Evolution. But I do want to say that when theists attempt to support their belief, they don't do it by coming up with evidence. Very often what they try to do is rubbish science and expect that to be their foundation.
So this is called negative argumentation. So it's not providing anything positive. It's like, this is what I believe, but it's like, what you believe, I'm going to pick that apart. But the problem with attacking evolution is that you're not just attacking evolution as this kind of entity that sits in its own bubble. Evolution is connected to virology, immunology, geography, paleontology, geology, biodistribution,
medicine,
medicine, all of these things. Like, you start picking apart that, actually, everything else comes down like a house of cards. So be warned, anti-evolutionists, because I think your special pleading, this isn't true, but you're happy to keep the rest of this that has been based on the knowledge of that evolution is true, in order to create the foundation for these things to be true. And when you look at geology, and when you say, look, you find a rabbit in the Precambrian like strata of rock, it disproves evolution. It hasn't happened. And then you got some. Come back to me. When you can really account for endogenous retroviruses, right? In anti-evolution or in creation science, like create science, in creationism, then get back to me. But as far as I'm concerned, you can't do it, and the attempts that you do make for that are poor. And but the problem is, John, there's this thing called Brandolini's law. Brandolini's law is a fantastic label for so the amount of time and effort you have to put into debunking bullshit is orders of magnitude above the time and effort it takes to spread that bullshit or to make that bullshit claim. And so, you know, be warned, because people come along and say evolution is wrong, blah, 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 blah. And you have to spend like weeks and weeks saying why that is not the case.
Yes, I've used Brandolini's law. It's a good one. So what else have we got? That's Di Grasso there. Look, here, this is one of his comments. But I wonder if he's had the vaccine. Do you think he's had the vaccine?
that would be interesting. And there's again, it's this anti-science crowd that there are interesting correlations, aren't there, between demographics and groups of people, and there's always special pleadings, like you'll take science in this area but you'll reject it in this area. You're happy to use your mobile phone to make an attack on an atheist over here, and use that kind of technology and science because, you know what, it doesn't interfere with your theology. But as soon as science interferes with your theology, you will drop it and find all these ways to try and establish it as not being true. But you'll leave alone all this other science. It's like, I don't know, huge double standards.
Yes. They'll happily get in an aircraft and fly to their destination, but they want to pick out some other bits that they don't like. Yes.
Yeah, quite. But evolution is one of those debates that goes on and on and on, and quite often people who attack it are not evolutionary or don't have the requisite expertise in the area. And I'm not saying I do, but you know what? I will defer to the people who do. And it's a bit like climate science denialists. It's like, you know, how about we defer here to the experts? And if the overwhelming majority of experts believe it to be true, based on empirical peer-reviewed evidence, then I'm going to go with them.
Yeah. Well, I'm a biology teacher, ex-biology teacher, and I'll have a go with these anti-evolutionists because I can bring up some decent points to refute them. But this isn't the purpose of this show. So we mentioned, you were talking about how they start with the narrative. You called it the theology.
Or just that you start with a theological position, right? And you adapt your claims around that. And when you look at the development of the Bible, it looks like that has happened. You know, if it walks like a duck, looks like a duck, sounds like a duck, it probably is a duck in this case. Yeah. And I think, you know, when you look at theological creation of all other religions, and you say, well, and even like different Christian sects, that where other, you know, Church of Latter-day Saints, or this and that, and you say, well, you as a Christian don't believe that, and you can see the anthropological kind of evaluation of these and see the development of the theology. Why can't you apply that to yourself? And I guess like this with certain stories, and I'd put the resurrection partly in on this, but things like Noah's Ark and Noah's flood. I have a belief, and it doesn't apply to everyone because certain people come to a belief later in life. But for many people who are Christian from childhood, you are born and brought up with Noah's Ark, right? So you have this idea that it rained, flood everywhere. Animals came onto the ark, and you even got songs about it, 2 by 2, hurrah, 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 hurrah. And you have these songs, and it's part of your cultural baggage, your cultural narrative, as well as being very much a religious narrative. And what happens is you're born and brought up with these stories. And then you are taught to critically analyze evidence as maybe a teenager or as an older child or whatever, or as an adult. But those things have already bypassed your veto, and they are in your mind as a belief, as a solid belief. And you use these newfound skills of evaluating what is improbable from what is probable plausible from implausible, and you apply them to all these other religions that then start coming your way, and you say, well, that's rubbish, that miracle's rubbish in Islam, that's rubbish, but you don't apply it to your own ones that are already sat inside, that have become culturally embedded. And so when the question, why do normal people believe ridiculous things? There are so many reasons why Noah's Ark is complete nonsense. There's not enough water on the earth, not enough water molecules. The earth's crust would implode and crush. You can't get like koalas across all these obvious things. You can't feed that amount. What do you do with all the feces?
If there ever was enough water, where's it gone?
Yeah, exactly. All of these arguments as to why that is complete nonsense are valid and completely invalidate that story, but that story still maintains for a lot of people, and they don't really critically evaluate it. And the question is, why don't they critically evaluate it? It's not the question, why do you believe it? Is why do you not disbelieve it? Why haven't you gone through the process of evaluating that critically? And it's because it's become embedded culturally as a child, and I think that's very important.
They don't want their comfort challenged, really, do they? I was going to say that another way in which the so-called evidence is added later to embellish the story is by archaeology. And one of my earlier guests on Ask an Atheist and I took down a what was his name? There was a Brian Edwards, an Answers in Genesis pastor who lives just up the road, believe it or not, at Epsom. And he has produced a number of works, including videos on archaeological evidence for the Bible. So Chris Attlee, one of my earlier guests on this show, and I took down his video, which it was rather fun.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of pseudo-archaeology. I mean, again, I refer you back to Brandolini's law, but you can assert. I debated on Unbelievable on Premier Christian Radio. I debated with Lydia McGrew, the Nativity, and she had an answer for all of the issues I said there were. And so when you see the comments in like the YouTube section, you see all the Christians saying, oh, she won that, and then the atheists saying that I did, and whatever. And it's all very partisan. But the point is that I think a lot of Christians, and this probably works the other way, doesn't it? But a lot of Christians will think if someone presents an answer with enough confidence and just says something, then that an answer becomes the answer. So I call this possibiliter ergo probabiliter, which is it's possible. What you said is possible. Okay, your answer might be, there might be a 2% chance of that being the case. It's possible. Therefore, that's what happened. That is what happened. It's now probable. And this jump from possible to probable is something you see really often. And you know, with these archaeological like hypotheses, like if they're not outright contradicted and wrong, which most often they are, if it's just like a horrendous possibility, like a minuscule possibility, that's not good enough to be the most probable hypothesis to explain the data. That's a very different thing.
That's what they'll cling to, though.
Yeah. Well, this could have happened. Well,
that's a problem.
Unicorns could exist.
Yes, indeed. That's a problem that we've got in the science field, because science being provisional, we can never rule anything out. And they want certainty, and they don't want to accept that there is no certainty.
Which is a very interesting point, because certainty is a psychological, it's something that humans absolutely crave, certainty. And when we don't get certainty, we struggle. And so therefore, religion offers certainty. And something like skepticism offers an awful lot of uncertainty. And actually, that we're not very good at dealing with uncertainty. When you look at well-being of belief systems, it turns out that it's a bell curve, right? And the people who have the highest well-being are the Christians who are really certain about their belief system. And the atheists, it's not just a Christians are happy, atheists are not. It turns out that really solid atheists have high well-being, really solid Christians have high well-being, and in the middle you have this bell curve, or maybe down like that, of the more uncertain you are, the less happy you are, or less well-being you have. and which feeds into what we know, which is we're not very good at dealing with uncertainty.
Yeah, indeed, ignorance is not bliss. I don't know whether the reverse saying ever caught on. And of course, in the list of those who have doubts, there is the Archbishop of Canterbury, who has expressed on BBC and in a couple of newspapers more than once that he's not certain that there is a God. And that's
really, I didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. Well, again, but then he would be, I presume, in the same way that I said I'm an agnostic atheist, he might be using that term as an agnostic theist, where he says, on balance, I think there is, but I have my doubts, and I think that's refreshingly honest if that's the way he is explaining it.
I can link you to the quotes that where he said that. Right. So the thing is, it's 10 o'clock, which means that we have come to the end of the show.
Oh, that's a good question, though. The next one. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead with it.
Well, it says modern conspiracy theories and religions appear to have a large amount of parallels, appealing to emotion over fact, etc. Is it fair to make the comparison and to say that existing religions are the surviving conspiracy theories of their day? I don't know whether it's fair to say they are conspiracy theories, but the interesting thing is psychology. I quite often think that, for me, the philosophy of religion and whether God exists is been and done now. That's for me. I'm fairly sure God doesn't exist, and there's really not a lot you can say that hasn't already been said, right? So now the interesting thing is, well, why do people believe? And because it's not about rational arguments. People don't tune into an interview like this and go, oh, that's brilliant. He's just said something that is absolutely awesome. I'm now going to believe whatever he believes. We don't do that. Beliefs are psychological and based on an awful lot of variables and things. So the question for me is, why do people believe conspiracy theories? What does it do what does it give them? And do religions and religious beliefs give them the same sort of provide the same sort of function? So beliefs are quite often functional. So when we believe in religion, we believe in them because it offers us social social networking, and it explains things to us, and it gives us comfort after death, and all these kind of different things. That's the function of religion. What's the function of conspiracy theories? Is it about authority and acting against authority? And I think possibly cults and conspiracy theories will have very similar, maybe, psychologies involved in them. And then what's the difference between a religion and a cult? Well, just the amount of adherence, right? So eventually a cult becomes a religion, and then a religion becomes accepted, and then it's all, very, I don't know. I don't know enough about psychology, but I think there must be a link between conspiracy theories and religion. There might be, and it sounds interesting.
Yeah, I haven't got it to hand, but I've read something recently about some research that's been done on this. And in fact, I know of a PhD researcher who did some interesting work on conspiracy theories. He came and spoke to
Rob Brotherton. Yeah, he used to do the skeptic circuit.
Yeah, he came and spoke to Chichester skeptics one night when I was there, and I actually asked the question. Yeah, I actually asked the question. I wonder if he's still available. I actually asked the question.
He moved to America.
Did he? Oh, right. Whether he saw any parallels between religion and conspiracy theories, and he didn't dismiss the idea at all.
Well, one of the things he did say was that if you believe in one conspiracy theory, you're more likely to believe in all of them or many more. And it's very interesting. I gave a talk once in Bournemouth, and in the Q&A session, I had a bit of a ding-dong with a guy who was a creationist. But it turned out, as we got further and further into kind of debating with each other, he was a young Earth creationist who was a flat earther, who was a moon landing, blah, 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 blah. He basically, the whole gamut of conspiracy theories,
climate change denier,
plus hardcore fundamental religion. Yeah. He just had the lot. He's like, I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. Got them all. All the badges.
Well, as I said, it's past my bedtime, and we've got Still quite a lot of people. Well, it's mostly, I can't remember his first name, Francesco Di Grasso, who desperately wants to debate with you. And he's asking if you will engage with him in the comments under this video. Well, there's an opportunity.
Maybe I have done before, and it's quite a fruitless enterprise. But there you go.
Yeah, I've engaged him a lot too, and he is a hard nut to crack. Fact,
you know, it's motivated reasoning again. It's back to what we talked about right at the beginning of this, which is when you've got that much to lose in not believing, then you will do anything to believe.
Cling on. Yes, it's a life raft, isn't it? The drowning man will clamber onto a stick. Oh, his name is Potangelo. I couldn't remember his first name, and he's wishing you hi. So I'll put that up for so that he knows that I've seen him. There you go, Potangelo. I haven't ignored you.
we have priors. We have priors.
Yeah. Me too. Yeah, but it's just a waste of time, isn't it? It's like arguing with the wall. Anyway, Jonathan, you have been, as predicted, as prophesied, utterly fantastic, and I'm sorry that we've got to bring it to an end now. But maybe you'll come back and we'll continue another day and do a slightly different subject area.
Yeah, absolutely. You know me, I'll talk about anything.
Yes, difficult getting a word in sometimes.
Yeah, sorry.
No, don't worry. So that's the point of a guest. I'm just here to facilitate you. So I just want to apologize to people who tuned in last week to my show, and Harris Sultan he had a calendar malfunction and he didn't turn up, but I've booked him. He will be on the show in 3 weeks time. I've got next week, we've got Buzz Bates, I think, coming on to talk to us from his point of view of atheism. And you may ask, some people ask, why do I use the word atheism if I'm not one, and if I don't think it's certainty that there is no God? And the reason is it's in the dictionary. You know,
it's useful. People know what you mean.
Yeah. It would be foolish to pretend it didn't exist. So anyway, thank you very much. Next week, Buzz Bates, and don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, tell your friends, set the notifications, do all that stuff. And thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here. Bye-bye.
Hey, John. Take care.